there's a parable. I'm going to call it a parable because I'm not quite sure how true the story is. But it's a story that I think has a great message and that it can be used as wonderful teaching for us in the Christian church. The story is about an anthropologist who goes to Africa. And what the anthropologist does is the anthropologist is sitting with a group of children. And what the anthropologist does is takes a basket and puts it far away from the kids and puts inside of it some very sweet fruit. And what he says to the children, this anthropologist says to the children, is run as fast as you can to get the basket of fruit. And whoever gets it, they will be the winner. So, what would you think would happen in this story? What we would probably see happen is this group of children, each of them racing on their own, running individually towards this basket. And one would be the winner. That's how our society is set up, that we have somebody that wins and we have other people who do not win. But instead, what happens is rather remarkable. All of the children, instead of taking off on their own accord, they grab hands and they run towards the basket together, each other holding the other's hand. And when the anthropologist stood back and looked at this, the anthropologist wondered why they did it that way. So they asked. And what was said was Ubuntu. Ubuntu is an African principle that means I am, therefore you are. Let me say that again. I am, therefore you are. It talks about the collective all having what they need. It talks about that if one person is given something, then all people are given something. I am, therefore you are. And I think that this principle of Ubuntu is very difficult for us in a white setting, in a setting that is in America, to try to understand what it means to be part of a greater collective, because our society is set up for a society of scarcity. What I mean by that is that we think, and this happens, I mean, if you pour juice from a cup into another cup, that juice is gone. There's no more juice left. Ask my 3-year-old how this happens. We have to share everything equally. We have to have everything equally so that nobody gets anything more than the other person. And that's an understanding of scarcity, that resources are limited. And I think sometimes we come to God in that same way. We come to God in the same way of trying to see that resources are limited. In today's scripture passage from Romans, I'm going to give you some backstory, and this will all tie together, I promise. What is happening in Rome at this time is that one leader had signed an edict. This is about 50 CE, Common Era, so about 20 years after the crucifixion of Christ. An edict had been signed throwing out any Jews and followers of the way from Rome. They were all thrown out. They were thrown out because there started to be divides and lines drawn in the sand about who was on the inside and who was on the out. Now, we know that the Romans were scared of the uprising that was coming from the Jewish people, or else there would not have been the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. We also know that that there became infighting between the Jews and the now Roman followers of the way. There became this infighting, and Paul starts writing over and over again about trying to get them to see and to understand the fact that just because the Jews may have been following this one God, Elohim, longer, it does not mean that they are the only true followers and that God is there for everyone. So this idea that God's resource of grace and love and the saving power of Christ is a scarcity is what these people are looking at right now. And I wonder if we start approaching God and Christ with an idea of Ubuntu, this idea that there is enough. I have it, therefore I can give it, therefore it multiplies. If we start to approach God that way, and if we start to approach scriptures that way, and teaching people about our love of Jesus Christ, I wonder how different our society would be. We are raised in a world at this point in time where everything feels scarce. Let's just look around at the current demographic, the current culture of our world. What happened back in March when the coronavirus began, when the lockdowns began? What did everybody do? Ran out and bought toilet paper. They were afraid that there wasn't going to be enough. So they had to grab for themselves. They took for themselves, not thinking about the other people in their community that this would be affecting. That's not a principle of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is that there is enough for us all. Ubuntu is that we all have, and we can all share from that. As Christians, I encourage us to try to begin to understand the Ubuntu principle. Let me put it a different way. On Facebook, there was a meme that was floating around for a while. And what the meme said was, "My flower does not bloom any more beautifully if I cut yours down next to mine." So think about that for a second. You have two flowers that are growing alongside of each other. This flower over here thinks that it will be more beautiful if it squelches this one. But that's not the truth. Each flower is beautiful in its own way, and there is enough space and there is enough beauty in the world for both flowers to grow alongside of each other. Ubuntu. I am, therefore you are. We carry the potential to have this be the justice in our world. That we don't have to rely on this idea, this misconception that scarcity is how we need to live our lives. Rather, we look towards the scriptures to tell us about God's great abundance. Last week, Pastor George preached about the abundant harvest that is out there. The abundant harvest that is being shown. The parable of the sower shows this, that from very little, great things can come. And it all works together for God's glory. I want to give you another example. In the scriptures, Christ talks about this principle of God's abundant love over and over again. We see it in the stories of the great tables that are set and people being invited to this banquet. But we also see it in the parable of the vineyard, where the vineyard owner goes out and hires somebody at 6 a.m. and says, "I will pay you for a full day's work." Then at 9 a.m., they hire more people to come into the vineyard, and they say, "You will be paid for a full day's work." The same thing happens at noon and at 3. And when the end of the work shift comes, what does the vineyard owner do? The vineyard owner gives out the same amount to everybody. And the people who were first felt that this was an injustice. But the people who were last were probably very grateful for that money, for that time. God gives out of God's abundance to all of us. That's the story of the Romans. And that's the story that the Romans need to understand. God gives out of God's abundance. If we all start looking for the fact that there is enough for everyone, we can start living out of that abundance as well. Scarcity can make us very scared. But if we look at the resources we have and who God is calling us to be, and work with God to make those resources for everyone, abundance is even more wonderful. Let us live into the principle and into the practice of Ubuntu, to know that we all are able to give abundantly and to have abundantly. I am, because you are. Amen.